The Wheel of Time. On one occasion, I mentioned to Carlos that I'd been on an excursion to the area of Bolson de Mapimi in the north of Mexico, to a place known as the Silent Zone. He told me that he had already been there, and added that the reason inexplicable phenomena happened in that place was because of powerful confluences of eagles' emanations. He said, "The confluence of emanations is what causes the well-known phenomena of distortion in compasses and other electronic devices. It is also responsible for the visual and auditory hallucinations in those who visit that area." Our conversation moved on to a topic that interested me greatly. Carlos called it the Wheel of Time. Time is the essence of eagles' emanations, he told me. The emanations are perceived by sentient beings as time. Time is our subjective sensation of the emanations. Sorcerers see time as constant flow, as if it were a giant wave with everything caught up in its crest, making it all move in unison. That effect makes passage of time seem real and unchangeable to us. If we could perceive everything at the same time, we would not see time as something that passes, but as the absolute, as an experience of eternity. The nature of our organs of perception is such that we select bundles of emanations in sequence, and that gives us the impression of the passing of time. Sorcerers have discovered that time is not something rigid. The manner in which we perceive it depends on the way we fix the position of the assemblage point. The human beings of our time are imprisoned in a collective position that makes us oscillate around the position of reason, where time is linear, a single recurrence moving ever forward in an unchanging direction. Well, all along, however, to break that linearity, that is why fiction stories are written about characters who travel through time. Deep down, we all know that the experience of time in which we are immersed is only a mirage shared by all of us who belong to this particular cluster of eagles' emanations. Once they have learned to fix their assemblage point in diverse positions, sorcerers experience different types of time, continuities that can flow slower or faster, or in several directions simultaneously. The sorcerers call this omnidirectional flow the supremacy of the Wheel of Time. Due to their experience in the labyrinth of time, the shamans of antiquity came to the conclusion that the real nature of time was cyclical, with no straight lines in the succession of events. That is why, in essence, all beings and events are cyclical, because everything recurs time and time again. They saw that there were certain patterns or molds in energy. They also saw that cycles superimposed themselves on one another, interacting in indescribable ways and mingling to form new cycles. That is why all beings are connected like the beads of the rosary, and absolutely everything that exists forms part of the same weave of eagles' emanations. That, for sorcerers, is the essential nature of the universe. Although I did not fully understand what he had said, I marveled at his explanation, while the scope of his level of awareness astonished me. Just to say something, I remarked that scientists had made significant discoveries about the texture of time and space. He replied, "Theoretical physicists are advanced explorers who use mathematical logic to investigate the universe, but even they feel it to be an ineffective and inappropriate tool. The proof is that they can't agree even among themselves, and the unified theory is a fallacy, explaining nothing. Real and tangible worlds exist where time passes in a way different from what is normal to us. I know. I have already been there. Here on Earth, sorcerers recognize anomalous points where emanations change their texture as places of power. In those places, energy behaves in ways different from the usual one. A sensitive person in the state of inner silence can extract a great deal of information about the mysteries of the universe from those sites. I asked him if he knew a place of power he could recommend. He replied evasively, "The world is full of such places, particularly here, because in this area, Eagle's emanations swirl like nowhere else I've seen. The difficulty lies not in finding such a place, but in being able to recognize it and use it appropriately. In fact, any place can be a place of power for the person who manages to reach silence. We are generally so confused by the hurly-burly of the world around us that it is very difficult to apprehend the tenuous oscillation that can be felt when we are silent. The vibration we perceive is Eagle's emanations. It is time passing by." The ancients knew that the universe could be explained in part, but never in its totality, because the universe is not there to be explained. The only sensible thing to do with Eagle's emanations is to use them. Shamans are very practical persons. They don't see the secrets of the wheel of time as theoretical knowledge, but as possibility of action. They have designed practices that actually make it possible for them to travel through time, although not through the linear time of our everyday experience, but through the real time of the emanations. What could be the practical use of that knowledge? I asked. The sorcerer who has learned to use the emanations knows it is possible to assimilate the moment, to make oneself one with it, and to extend eternally in any direction of his choice. Such is the freedom of perception, our real destination as luminous beings. Sorcerers struggle to break with the human form and to divest themselves of personality. Ultimately, they do it to make themselves one with the emanations of time and flow with them. The goal is to establish a personal relationship with time, a harmonic relationship that allows them to flow with the emanations in perfect equilibrium, so that the human will and the will of the eagle are the same. Paraphrasing something that he himself had written, he said, "The knowledge of time is available only to those who investigate it deliberately." I wanted to know what that type of investigation consisted of. He replied, "To flow with time, you have to learn to face it as it advances towards you, just like a bird which faces the oncoming wind in order to soar, never the receding one. By the same token, to face time, you must abandon the tendency to see yourself at the end of a line of events, as a participant in the chain of your personal and collective history. It is an illusion. The past and the future do not exist. The only thing that you really have is this moment. If you want to deal with the oncoming time, you have to dare to live the present. To flow with time is to live this moment intensely, accepting or rejecting the challenges that appear on our path, learning and experimenting with every new day of our life. To live in the present does not mean abandoning oneself to the randomness of the moment. On the contrary, it means having the speed to grasp everything the second it happens, without passing it through the filter of reason. That way, the world renews itself all the time, and the most exciting possibilities open themselves to us. One thus becomes aware of everything that happens around him. Living in the present does not imply disregarding past experiences. It means learning to see them as they really are. Events outside time in the flow of the cosmic intent. That allows one to extract accurate lessons from them and even gives one the capacity to modify them as required. That is what recapitulation is for. Through recapitulation, you can literally intervene in the energy flow of the past. A sorcerer who has learned to manipulate the wheel of time can deliberately interfere in events as much as the power allows and alter the future in his favor. By doing that, he puts himself in the best possible position for the completion of his task. The most dramatic effect the Wheel of Time has on a sorcerer's experience is the realization that he does not actually exist here or there, because time and space are not as absolute as we believe them to be. The parallel lines. I had just finished rereading the story of the jump into the abyss when I found out that Carlos was visiting the city. I immediately called the hotel where he usually stayed. They confirmed that he was indeed staying there, but was not in his room at that moment. Whenever Carlos arrived on a visit to the city, the news would usually spread among those interested. So, after a bit of investigation, I found out he would be giving a talk in an esoteric center run by one of his friends. I presented myself at the appointed time, sat down behind the others, and prepared to listen to the Naguals' teachings. It was Carlos's custom to disguise information by jokes and irrelevant prattle. Nevertheless, those who knew what he was talking about always recognized his hidden lessons. That evening he spoke of what he called the greed of the middle classes. He said that our current system had transformed people into needlings, the need people. He openly ridiculed the meaningless life the middle classes had espoused, with the sole goal of achieving the coveted purchasing power so that they could buy a pile of useless objects they ended up storing in their garages until one day, weary of having no space, they threw everything out as rubbish. I remember that he classed himself as a proletarian, obviously referring not to his lack of resources, but to the fact that he did not possess or want anything. He said that being poor did not mean having no money. It was the need to possess things. Having finished his talk and going through the usual ritual of saying goodbye to his assistants, he signaled me with his eyes, indicating that I should look for him later. I went to his hotel and found him alone in the restaurant. He invited me to sit down. He had ordered a soup with tortillas. I ordered the same. When we had finished eating, I asked him what had really happened to him during that famous jump into the abyss, confessing I hadn't quite understood the metaphor. It is not a metaphor, Carlos interrupted me firmly and explained. There are sorcery traditions in which sorcerers choose to perform a leap at the moment of departure on their final journey. With that intent, the participants jump together off the top of a high cliff. If they pass the test, they disappear from this world. Those who fail are found dead at the bottom of the cliff. The test that Don Juan put me through was really a preparation for what is yet to come. What jumped into the abyss that day were, first of all, my perception, and then the totality of me. I'd arrived at the inevitable conclusion that we were not solid, but were a feeling. A perception placed inside a description we called body. And Don Juan gave me the opportunity to prove it. He went on to say that on reaching a certain level of awareness, one loses the certainty of being solid and surrounded by a world of objects. From that point onwards, one perceives the world in a way completely different from the usual one. He gave me as an example the reference he had made in his work to crossing the boundary between the two states of awareness, which he called the parallel lines. A sorcerer's achievement that could also be described as movement of the assemblage point from one specific position to another, instantaneously allowing the warrior to perceive a different world. According to Carlos, the process of transition between one world and another is perceived as a wall of fog, a perceptive gap caused by the movement of the assemblage point, while a different description is being aligned. Among themselves, the sorcerers refer to that place as the limbo, or the place of the yellow dunes. The bodily sensation one feels while aligning that other world is one of physically breaking a paper wall, which is giving light resistance and is perceived as a wall of fog. Breaking through that barrier is necessary in order to be able to align another world. The transition is perceived bodily as a crack at the base of the skull, like a twig breaking in two, accompanied by a bell-like sound in the ears. Sorcerers encourage their apprentices to repeat with the left side of the body any movement they do with the right side. The left-handed obviously need to perform this exercise in the reverse. The reason for this exercise is to help break a physical barrier that exists inside us. Once this barrier is shattered, it becomes much easier to move the assemblage point and to enter dreaming. Sorcerers use the metaphor of the limiting line to get the apprentice to commit to his new life of struggle as a warrior. To cross that line means to enter another world. That is equivalent to breaking the parallel lines, which is neither more nor less than moving the assemblage point. And what about the parallel being? I asked. This being is the mirror image of oneself. It exists in the world at the same time as we, and is our energetic counterweight, since absolutely everything that exists comes in pairs. If our parallel being dies, we suddenly get ill, without an apparent reason, and also die. The warriors who have the good fortune of finding their parallel being while in this world find in it a source of youth, happiness, and joy, because one completes the other. Very few warriors, however, have accomplished this feat. As I've described in The Second Ring of Power, the book that should never have been, Doña Soledad was one of the few. Why do you say that The Second Ring of Power should never have been? I asked. He took his time answering. As he smoothed his hair backwards, I could see an area of baldness at the front, which he concealed successfully by combing his hair forward. He appeared not to like discussing the subject very much, but nevertheless replied. At the time, I delivered a just completed work to my New York publisher, but Doña Florinda, having had found out what it was about, told me that people still weren't ready for that kind of revelation, and made me run back to the publisher at once to recover the manuscript, which was already being printed. It took a lot to convince the publisher not to publish that book. I had to promise to bring him a new one in 4 weeks' time. That was how The Second Ring came into being. Full of curiosity, I asked, and what happened to the book that Doña Florinda stopped you from publishing? I thought he was not going to answer, but to my surprise, he said, "It was about the world of dreaming and our relationship with the inorganic beings and flyers. That is why one of the proposed titles was Seen Through the Eyes of the Predator. The fact is, I was never happy about swapping the two books around, as according to the agreement I had with Don Juan, I wasn't obliged to write about the other apprentices. What's more, I regret ever having published that work. I assured him that I loved the Second Ring of Power, and that in my humble opinion, we were lucky to have such valuable material, which gave us better understanding of the life and the ways of sorcerers' apprentices." He shrugged his shoulders as if to say, "Does it matter?" The Dome of the Naguals. When I told my companions that I had decided to relate part of my experience of living with them in a new book, the Atokayo warned me about the dangers of fame and fortune. He said it was important to watch out lest my intention to help others should become the ultimate objective of my path. "Many betray the intent of freedom," he said, "for hope of wealth or desire to be famous, loved, and admired by others. The real warrior has an insatiable thirst for freedom and infinite curiosity about everything. He is thus always experimenting and learning. That keeps him on the straight path and makes him humble before this splendor in which we are immersed. Even when sharing his achievements with others, the warrior does not get bogged down in the mire of personal importance, simply because he has no time to lose. He knows very well that death is at his heels, urging him to keep experimenting and enjoying the world. He also told me I had to be extremely detached if I was planning on facing that challenge, and charged me never to reveal the identities of my companions in my writings. Opening up to people has a very high price, he said, and gave me Carlos as an example. Although he was a formidable warrior, he paid with his own life, and perhaps even with his freedom for having become accessible. He made that comment because, according to some seers who had been in contact with him in the other world, Carlos had adopted the emergency plan. Once the deterioration of his physical body had begun, he joined the other seers of his lineage in the graveyard of the Naguals. Carlos had previously touched very briefly on the topic of the graveyard of the Naguals, never completely clarifying the meaning of that elusive concept. I had been waiting long for an opportunity to ask him about it. That afternoon, after he had finished with his commitments, we met in a restaurant with a few small tables on the pavement. After the meal, we went for a walk to a nearby park. When we got closer, I remained spellbound for a moment, watching water form a transparent dome as it gushed out of a fountain. I had to make a conscious effort to break its allure. We sat down on a nearby bench, and I asked hurriedly, "Carlos, what is the real goal of sorcerers?" As he began to speak, I realized I had forgotten my notebook in the restaurant. But I said nothing to Carlos lest I disturb the flow of the ideas he was expounding. In the course of his explanation, he mentioned that Don Juan had given him a task, the full details of which he did not wish to disclose at that particular time. Finally, he said that should he fail in his task, his teacher had promised to try and come back from wherever he was to fetch him. My face must have been showing anxiety, because Carlos asked, as if reading my mind, "Where are your notes?" I confessed I had left them in the restaurant, and asked him for permission to go and get them. I ran back and recovered the notes without any problems. On return, trying to recapture the thread of our conversation, I asked, "And where do you believe Don Juan might be now?" "I'm sure that he and his warriors have gone to join the other seers of his lineage in the dome of the Naguals." Seeing my inquisitive look, Carlos added, "The last time we were together, I saw all of them dissolve into thin air." Don Juan had chosen a mountaintop as the place from which to embark on his definitive journey. In that place, I and the other apprentices took our final leave of him. After his departure, I remained adrift for years, not knowing whether I was coming or going. Finally, I started remembering everything that had transpired, and it took me many more years to be able to understand what I had remembered. Even now, new memories of the time under the Nagual Juan Matis's tutelage keep cropping up. At one time, I was more than confused. Can you imagine what it means to have two different memories of the same event? I was on the verge of losing my sanity when finally the answers came. After years of struggle, I managed to establish some order in the chaos of my memories. If you look carefully, you'll see that in my books I describe some events from the point of view of different levels of awareness. I did that because on each level I saw and interpreted differently whatever was happening to me. That is the mystery of heightened awareness. In those moments, one lives with such intensity that it takes one years to realign the memory. Carlos reflected in a silence for a moment and then went on. On one occasion, Don Juan took me to a secluded place deep in the mountains and gave me his pipe to smoke. While I was under the power of the smoke, he showed me a colony of red insects. Extraordinary visions that at the time made no sense to me followed. I felt that I was flying towards a gigantic white dome. Later, Don Juan explained the meaning of what had happened. The seers of antiquity, he said, had created a refuge in the dreaming world based on the structural organization of those bugs. He revealed to me that he and his group planned to go there after they left this world. I was astonished to hear Carlos say that. Until then, I believed that his teacher and his party of warriors had gone to the third attention. 1,000 questions came to my mind at that instant, but I did not know where to begin. I remained absorbed for a moment, considering the implications of what he had revealed. Carlos must have noticed my amazement, because he opened his mouth wide in a caricature of my expression. Then he added, smiling, "I was left gaping too when I heard that." Don Juan told me that the ancients had discovered the form of existence created by those insects completely by chance during one of their gazing practices. Having thoroughly observed them, they got so intrigued that they ended up moving their assemblage points to the position of those little bugs, transforming physically into them. Thus, they discovered that the social organization created by those beings was perfection itself. Consequently, they built a replica of that structure at a location in the other world. I was very interested to know how and when the Ancient Ones had created that place. The sorcerers of antiquity tell that in their distant past, a very powerful Nagual pair existed. It is said, were the founders of our tradition. Those sorcerers were such teachers of dreaming that they managed to teach their art to their entire people. They say that, with time, those people become so skilled at dreaming that for them, there was no longer any difference between being awake and dreaming. They acted in both realms with equal control. Under the supervision of the Nagual pair, that nation of dreamers managed to recreate their cities inside their visions of collective dreaming. And when the moment came, they chose to go and live in the world of their creation. One day, they simply vanished from the face of the earth. Having said that, Carlos kept looking at me as if assessing my reaction. I was fascinated by what he had told me and just wanted him to keep on speaking. After a moment, he continued. In the course of time, going to that place became a priority goal for many sorcerers. Whole lineages met up there. The place thus became known for many as the refuge or the sanctuary. As the number of residents increased, their community transformed into an enormous bubble of collective dreaming, maintained to this very day by the intent of a large number of sorcerers, keeping their assemblage points fixed on that position in unison. Where is that place? They are placed somewhere out there in that immensity, he said, and gestured with his arm, indicating the infinite space. Dreamers who travel to that place see it as an enormous white dome. But are they on another planet? He smiled slightly before answering. As I have told you, they exist in another position of the assemblage point. Over time, they transformed that place into a fantastic base where they accumulated their resources. Taking advantage of their inorganic existence, they venture from there through the entire cosmos, exploring the most incredible possibilities of perception. They can do that because in their condition, time passes differently, and the known laws of space-time do not apply. That is how they manage to escape the wear and tear of biological existence and are still alive today. Because they've managed to link directly with the awareness of the earth. They can go on existing for near eternity, as long as our planet exists. And why do they do that? Their goal was to survive at any cost and to defy death. They chose to transform themselves into a special type of inorganic being. However, aware of the predatory conditions that rule out there, they conspired to create a refuge in the other world. Staring fixedly into my eyes, he added, "You already know that the universe at large is predatory. Once you pass to the other side, you become subject to its laws and the groups of inorganics that rule there. On many occasions, real battles have broken out among them for the awareness of the inhabitants. By creating their hive, the ancient seers have managed to retain a high level of independence. And even if it does not free them completely from the influence of the inorganic kingdom, at least they are not its slaves." The Sorcerer's Option. Carlos maintained that a ferocious war over awareness was waged throughout the cosmos. In some ways comparable to the petty wars we, in our world, fought over food and material goods. He said that this tremendous battle to evolve and to prevail raged on all the levels of existence with equal savage intensity. We ourselves fought one another in that self-seeming battle at that very moment. In that self-same battle at that very moment. Aware of the situation, the warriors planned the strategy of his life in the best possible way to avoid wear and tear. By staying alert, the warrior avoids falling victim to attacks, considerably enlarging his energy at the same time. On that occasion, I asked Carlos to explain to me in more detail the concept he called the Sorcerer's Option. From his books, I had understood that those who did not achieve total freedom were consumed by the eagle when they died, and that was the end of their story. He replied, "In fact, a large scale of possibilities exists for those who die, ranging from instant loss of awareness at the moment of transition to maintaining the memory of self for a certain period of time. Like life, death touches us all, but it is not the same for all." Through their investigations, sorcerers discovered ways of extending the duration of individual awareness to its maximum. Does that mean that they become immortal? Not at all. What I'm saying is that sorcerers manage to find a way of suspending death, not of canceling it. For them, to die does not have the same meaning it has for ordinary people. For them, the opposite of dying is not immortality, but continued existence. The trick lies in understanding that to be alive does not necessarily mean being an organism. Rather, it means being aware. Seers throughout the ages have always been hugely interested in this topic because it has to do with the real purpose of our existence. The ancients used their seeing to investigate it and discovered that energy initially took physical form in order to evolve. Next, the sorcerers observed that although biological life lasted a limited period of time, after which it ceased to exist, the energy that animated matter was eternal. They saw that it was possible, by means of discipline and self-determination, to train that bundle of energy that forms us to become aware of itself. Joining their two discoveries together, those sorcerer-seers proposed to remain aware forever. That is what they referred to when they spoke of attaining freedom. What they were really trying to do was prolong the individuality of awareness as much as they could. Theirs is a phenomenal battle, with the flame of awareness bravely and unceasingly struggling to stay alight. Indeed, it is, as it has been said, the light of a candle against the glare of a billion stars. The ultimate maneuver. The next time I had the opportunity to speak to Carlos, I said that having considered what he had told me the last time, I had new questions. He looked at me inquisitively and arched his eyebrows as if to say, "Let's hear them." My curiosity had to do with the way of life and the activities of those who had transformed themselves into inorganic entities. I asked Carlos how they had achieved the transformation. "That is a personal matter," he replied. "Each lineage has its own goals and its own methods of achieving them. There are sorcerers who have transformed themselves into trees, or have buried themselves alive to defy death. Other groups believe that body is an obstacle, which is why they free themselves of their physical part at the moment of leaving. Don Juan and his party did not leave even their ashes behind. They left with everything and their sandals. In the most elegant way, they dissolved into thin air. Warriors of total freedom, on the other hand, merge with the emanations at large and disappear forever, consumed by fire from within. They are never heard of again. Theirs is truly a journey of no return. Some of them believe that it is still possible to preserve the sense of individuality in that condition. Others think that instead of being total freedom, merging with emanations at large means total death and nothing more. No one knows what really happens. There are a few stories about warriors who opted for that final maneuver. The Nahual Julian Osorio was one of them. But the vast majority chooses other, less definitive options, like joining the world of the inorganic beings, for example, while knowing full well that their choice implies serious disadvantages, since in that world, like in ours, the individual serves the collective and ends up exchanging the chance of remaining aware for slavery. Another option, of course, is what I've already told you, to try and reach the dome of the Nahuals. Those who took that option are still alive, but the moment will come when they will have to relinquish awareness and return all the experience they'd acquired to its original owner. That is why they call the dome the graveyard of the Nahuals. Because regardless of how long they manage to survive, one day they will have to die. The Naguals Plan. During one of our final meetings, Carlos confessed he was feeling a bit sick. Jokingly, he said he was still waiting for the potion I had gone to fetch him years ago. We both had a good laugh, especially when he told me that, at the time, he'd phoned me to ask me to get it. He had not even been in Mexico. Taking advantage of the rare opportunity to talk to him privately, I asked him why he charged for his seminars, knowing full well that he had no need of money. I was aware that even though it was not always apparent, the Nahual had a purpose behind everything he did. He replied, "As you know, in the past, Nahuals like me helped entire cities pass to the other side, where they still exist today. I didn't want to make an open commitment to the public, but our goal is to prepare as many warriors in as a short period of time as possible to make the crossing. You are the witness, Armando, that for many years I offered my knowledge freely, without charging a fee. However, the circumstances have now changed. The Nahual is a provider, and it is his duty to ensure that the members of his party do not lack anything. On the other hand, there is the decision we made, following omens, to teach Don Juan's legacy of freedom to everyone. That is why currently we charge for the seminars. When one learns to intend in dreaming, the possibilities are limitless. We wish to create a place in the other world, free of inorganic beings and unburdened by the old sorcerer's tradition. We look forward to establishing a more democratic place with fewer ritualistic procedures, a place where individual rights are respected, and most importantly, where no one is anyone's slave. We believe it is possible to create a modern version of what the ancient sorcerers accomplished, but according to our own rules. Florinda and the other witches working together are capable of creating what we call the cosmic vagina, an opening in space-time. Our plan is to leave the world through that passageway. Many scholars laugh when I say this, just as, in his time, they laughed at Christopher Columbus when he said that the world was round and that unknown civilizations existed on the other side of the ocean. It is true that the price is high, both in energy and in dispensing with rationality, Yet it is not possible to pay, so that sorcerer's experience is placed within everyone's reach. All that is required is unbending intent of what one seeks. I, I know it is supreme audacity on our part trying to send thousands of warriors to the other world. What a stir that would cause today with the modern means of communication. Can you imagine? Yes, my critics would believe me then. Don Juan taught, and I have personally been able to corroborate, that the universe is composed of many layers or dimensions, if you prefer to call them that. Many possibilities exist. It is truly a shame to waste our entire lives on a single and exclusive worldview. There are whole worlds waiting to be explored by the Columbuses of our time, and there are many that are infinite. Part 2. The World of the Sorcerer-Healer. At the healer's house. Our private joke about the phone call had to do with something that happened years ago when Carlos phoned me one morning. He said he was visiting the city, but was feeling very unwell. He was very strong, but of delicate health, which he blamed on his excesses and on the profusion of power plants Don Juan had given him. Thus, although surprised, I did not find it strange that he was calling for my help when he told me in a suffering voice that he had a terrible stomachache. He asked me to go to a neighboring village for a remedial brew that had been prepared by his herbalistic friend. I immediately put myself at his disposal and set out for the village. When I arrived at my destination, things got complicated. It turned out I was to go to the nearby hills to harvest the right herb for making the potion Carlos required. I was warned that the area was dangerous, but in spite of that, I waded into the shrubbery in search of the necessary plants. I was busy collecting a tiny amount of the rare herb when a number of bad-tempered, muscular fellows armed with rifles and machetes sprung out of nowhere. They started a nasty row with me, claiming I had invaded their collection area. I tried to talk to them and explain why I needed the plants, offering them money and my watch. When I said that the herbs were for Don Eladio, however, they got really angry and began thrashing me, beating me so hard I thought I was going to die. I lay unconscious for an unknown period of time, too badly injured to move. I resigned myself to dying there among the hills, but my lucky star wanted me to be found by a female healer who rescued me and healed my wounds. The healer was Doña Silvia Magdalena, who eventually became my teacher. With her, I learned the art of healing and much, much more. During my time in her care, we talked a lot. She told me stories that made me cry with laughter, which in turn made my wounds hurt very badly. I learned to love her unconditionally. How I relished those days, in spite of being so very ill. According to her, I was almost dead when she got to me. She told me that she would never have found me but for a whirlwind that gave her indication of where I was and led her to me. When she saw me, she said, I was naked and covered in blood, whereupon she took me home and personally nursed me for 3 months. She used her knowledge to heal my wounds, and then, following omens, took me on as her healer's apprentice. I remember one occasion when from under the window where I used to spread my bedroll, I could see the full moon shining in all its glory. I used to spend hours there gazing at the stars. From where I lay, every night I would watch the constellation of the Big Dipper sail by. Like a moving carriage, it would lull me into deep healing sleep. That particular night I had a strange dream. I even thought that my attacks had returned and that I had relapsed into one of my reoccurring nightmares. Frightened, I woke up, and by the light of the moon, I saw a huge coyote sitting on the frame of the open window, examining me with curiosity. My sudden movement frightened the animal away, and my hysterical reaction roused Doña Silvia, who immediately came to my aid. I was still screaming in terror when she arrived. My voice faltered with emotion as I described what I had seen. She dismissed the incident, however, saying it was just a bad dream. She would prepare me a lime blossom infusion, which would calm me and make me go back to sleep. As she stoked up the fire in the wood stove to make the tea, I told her I was still excited by what had happened. Although after a while, I managed to calm down a bit. I was not all that convinced that what I had seen had been just a dream. The sight of a coyote sitting in the window with legs crossed, like a person, was really something outside the realm of the possible. The next day, I asked Doña Silvia again what had happened. And to my surprise, she said, laughing like anything, that I'd probably been visited by the Nagual. I experienced a jolt. Until then, I believed her to be just an ordinary healer. But hearing her utter the word Nagual filled me with excitement because that was the first time I had heard that term being used outside the context of Carlos's books. Full of curiosity, I asked, "What do you know about the Nagual, Doña Silvia?" She gave me a huge wide-eyed look full of terror and, crossing herself, said in a dramatically broken whisper, "The Nagual is the devil." In a highly theatrical fashion, she told me that the Nagual often prowled around looking for a sick person to snatch, and that I must have been lucky since it had not killed me. The conversation was not what I had expected. In order to change the subject, I said she may have been right last night when she said that it had all been just a dream. She, however, vehemently insisted that I had been visited by the Nagual, and even began examining the window frame for the animal's hair to prove that what she had said was true. She went on scaring me for a long time, with casual comments about people she had heard had been carried off by the Nagual. She claimed that the Nagual was a demon that could swoop down on anyone and even pry into their dreams. With a deadly serious face, she advised, "You have to be very mindful of what goes on in your dreams. If you sense anything strange in your dream, you must tell me at once." I had suffered since childhood from terrible nightmares, in which, among other things, I would dream of falling into a bottomless pit, or a monster would chase me, always just a few steps behind. I was never able to see it, yet I somehow knew it was horrible and was going to hurt me. After a falling dream, I would wake up suddenly, frightened and screaming. But whenever the monster pursued me through my dream, I would undergo hours of torment, fleeing and hiding and trying unsuccessfully to wake up. I would finally end up falling into some blurry blackness, then wake up very tired and covered in sweat, as if I had run a marathon. My general weakened state and the rural environment were beginning to have an effect on me. Her comments, which in different circumstances may not have mattered to me at all, now worried me a great deal and further fueled the fire of my nocturnal fears. So much so that I spent several long nights with my eyes wide open, dreading the moment of falling asleep, which would inevitably come because of fatigue. As if they had only been waiting for my fear to manifest itself, my nightmares would return with greater intensity than ever. The attacks were so fierce that on some nights my screams would wake up everyone. On one such occasion, I began recounting one of my nightmares to Doña Silvia, but she would not listen, merely saying that I should stay alert in order to avoid the worst. One night, when all seemed lost, I met with Doña Silvia in one of my dreams. She started giving me instructions that made me completely forget my fears. I would also forget the dream itself. On waking, dream events would almost immediately fade from my memory. I'd only vaguely remember having encountered her and other people. It was as if a fog had invaded my mind, preventing me from thinking coherently about what I had dreamed only a moment before. At that time, I still had no control over the fluctuation of dream images and would lose memory of them with tremendous speed. Eventually, I realized that if I followed the simple tip of fixing a scene with my attention, the images remained in focus much longer. I also learned to use the technique of returning to the starting point for recuperation every time I felt I was losing control. That is how I ended up participating in a world of activities that were truly beyond any description.